By the era of classical antiquity, the independent kingdoms of Israel and Judah were in terminal decline. As a result, the history of the Jewish people soon came to be defined by the carousel of foreign empires that took turns conquering and subsequently ruling the ancestral Hebrew homeland. First came the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, who ruled the Jews with a reasonably fair and light hand. Finally, in 332 BC, the Macedonian phalanxes of Alexander would steamroll the Achaemenid Empire out of existence, establishing Classical Greek as the dominant language and culture of the Near East. It is here that the Jewish people became subjects of the Greek world. When Alexander died, his massive Macedonian empire fractured into several monarchies, ruled by his closest comrades and later their descendants. The so-called Diadochi kingdoms were constantly at war with one another, and the region of Judea, being situated in the borderland between the Ptolemies of Egypt and Seleucids of Syria, became a battleground where the two Macedonian dynasties jockeyed for power and influence. Despite this, life remained fairly peaceful for the Hebrews. The Hellenistic kings generally used the same light touch the Persians had, interfering very little in the region's culture, religion, and internal politics. The Jewish people were ruled semi-autonomously by a high priest of the Judaic faith, who handled matters both religious and secular from the Great Temple of Jerusalem. In 198 BC, Antiochus III had finally expelled the Ptolemies out of Judea, putting the region firmly under the suzerainty of the Seleucid Empire. He lowered taxes and affirmed the Jewish people's freedom to live by their own faith and laws, and for now, Judea was content. Throughout world history, we often see subject peoples of a multi-ethnic empire willingly adopt the language and customs of said empire's rulers in an attempt to improve social mobility, so many Jewish peoples began to practice the Greek culture of their suzerains. This phenomenon, known as Hellenization, was perpetuated mainly by the upper strata of Jewish society, namely the wealthy priests, merchants, and aristocrats in urban Jerusalem. The Hellenization process was expedited in 175 BC, when the culturally traditionalist high priest, Ananias III, was deposed by his Philhellene brother Joshua, better known by his Greek name Jason. Jason would go on to wield his power as high priest to begin transforming Jerusalem into a classically Greek city by building a gymnasium and an ephebium, essentially community centers for Greek education and learning. He also sent Jewish athletes to compete in a mimicry of the Olympic Games hosted by the king in Tyre. There he offered a sacrificial tribute to the Greek demigod Hercules, to whom the games were dedicated. Perhaps his most radical policy was to allow non-Jews in Jerusalem to set idols of their gods within the Holy Temple itself. The fact that the high priest was openly tolerating and even promoting the polytheistic gods was deeply disturbing to many Jews who clung to their monotheist faith. This sentiment was especially strong in the poorer, rural communities of Judea, who had clung far closer to orthodox Judaism. A strained situation was made worse in 175 BC, when one Antiochus IV Epiphanes became the Seleucid Basileus. Various ancient accounts describe him as a proto-Nero or Commodus, that is to say, erratic. His sobriquet, Epiphanes, meant manifested from God, but among his people he was secretly known by a variation of the title, Epimanes, which meant madman. It was him who in the first year of his rule supported Jason's coup against Ananias III, hoping a pro-Greek high priest would help Hellenize the Jews. However, only 3 years later, Antiochus decided that Jason wasn't Hellenizing Judea fast enough, so helped replace him with an even more pro-Hellenic priest, Menelaus. With that matter settled, Antiochus then marched with his armies into Egypt, aiming to double the size of his empire by seizing the Ptolemaic heartland. While the king was preoccupied, Jason seized his opportunity and returned to Jerusalem, initiating a counter-coup and expelling the deeply unpopular Menelaus. However, Antiochus's campaign was cut short when the Roman Republic intervened on behalf of the Ptolemies. Unable to match the strength of the legion, the king was forced to retreat to Syria. Already utterly humiliated by Rome, Antiochus's mood turned wrathful when he found out that his subjects in Jerusalem had rebelled. He stormed Jerusalem with his army, slaying the supporters of Jason and reinstating his puppet Menelaus as high priest. He then left Apollonius in charge of subduing the city, who accomplished his job by dismantling the walls of Jerusalem and building a fort named Acra on the nearby hill of Ophel, so everyone could gaze upwards and see the symbol of King Antiochus's power. Rather than leaving good enough alone, Antiochus began to actively exterminate Judaism, forbidding the people of Judea from observing the Sabbath, circumcising their sons, or performing other rituals. He had the Holy Temple in Jerusalem converted into a temple of Zeus, within which he personally spilled the blood of a pig, a deeply sacrilegious ritual to the Judaic faith. The king declared that the Jewish people should begin worshipping the Greek gods. Hellenized Jews accepted these changes, but many others did not, resolving instead to fight. It is here that the Maccabees enter our story.